Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-FantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of 30 Coins. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. This episode did an interesting thing where it kind of solidified something I was kind of wondering last episode, and it seems like this is kind of, at least, so far, it seems like this show is a little structured kind of like Lovecraft Country, in the sense that like every episode is kind of its own thing, but there's a connecting over arc, at least the TV show, because like the book for Lovecraft, as I've talked about before, to my understanding, it's very like, they're just multiple stories all together in one book, but the TV show made it an overarching story to a certain extent. So it seems like they're doing that with 30 Coins, but maybe making it even more of an overarching story than Lovecraft was. Because everything is following, obviously it's mainly about the town, but it's you have your three consistent characters, Paco, Elena, and Father Manuel. But other than that, like, it's just kind of like different crazy stuff that's going on. And that's why I find it so fascinating, because at first I was like, okay, so it does seem like this group, as we learn, are the Canaanites. We learned that like they're behind a lot of stuff, but at the same time, because this episode probably kind of solidifies some stuff. It not solidifies, it points in a certain direction of like what I was saying before. I wasn't sure why Manuel was doing what he was doing, like pretending like things weren't what they were. So either he has been ignorant and turning a blind eye to a lot of stuff because he didn't want to accept them for being what they really were, that all this stuff was happening, or he really was trying to keep Elena and them safe by not telling them the old truth, because once you know the truth, your entire world will forever be changed. Granted, their entire worlds have been changed because of the crazy shit that happened episode 1, episode 2, and the crazy stuff that went down this episode. Obviously, this mirror thing, that was an interesting development. But then, because at first it's like, the mirror was already there when this couple had moved in. So I was under the assumption like that, well, what am I trying to say? That it was already a thing. Like that mirror was already there, so it was already like shenanigans. It was already haunted or whatever the case may be. I thought that was the case, so I thought it had nothing to do with everything going on, which confused me because I was like, everything else that's kind of going on is connected to these people who want the coins, right? So I'm like, so is this not connected at all? Is it just some crazy stuff that's happened in town? But obviously nothing as crazy has happened in town until the events of these past 2 episodes. But it seems like, in the grand scheme of things, they are connected to the mirror. But it's an interesting development because obviously the lady shows Paco shows Elena, and then eventually they bring Manuel into the fold, because basically it's like, look at that book there. You see the book on the table? Okay, good. Now to look behind you. Oh, the book's not there. I'm like, okay, this is trippy. So, and then eventually we see it more and more, but most everything in the reflection of the mirror is true. Like what's in the reflection is there in this world too, but it's like there are small differences. The book, and then eventually the doors open. But Paco ended up talking to Manuel about everything. And so it turns out that because they had translated the book, and it ended up being revealed that it's like a gospel of Judas, and it's a gospel that's kind of been written out of the Bible. Apparently, obviously there's different versions, because obviously there's different versions of the Bible, but like obviously stuff from different gospels that aren't included in the Bible, I think. But this one in particular was about essentially this belief that, well, this whole thing about apparently Judas and Jesus were in on it together. Jesus told Judas to betray him. And it's like, wait, what? Because even later on, Paco's like, if this is true, this basically turns everything upside down, because what we've come to know and believe isn't, once again, I'm not a religious person, so I don't know if this is actual real belief that exists in the world, or is it just something they made for the TV show? I assumed it was something they made for the TV show, but it's fascinating if it ends up being a real thing. Once again, I've talked about it. I'm not a very religious person, so I'm not well versed in religion. So, but either way, it's such a fascinating thing. This whole belief that, because that mean, the way Manuel was explaining it is that basically this means that it was, God's Almighty knows everything. Everything's part of his plan. That means what happened to his son was a part of his plan, meaning that it was for Judas needed to betray Jesus so that Jesus could come back and be our salvation. So it was all part of the plan. But that also starts, because obviously that leads down the road, that some people have a problem with, in the regard that if God knows everything, that means he lets evil and terrible stuff happen. So it could be looked at as like, wait, so evil is a necessity for good. It's like, no, in some regard, you can almost look at least the Canaanites look at it as, hey, evil actually is good, because it's kind of like, well, I guess it fits very metaphorically in the sense that it's kind of two sides of the same coin, because committing evil is all part of the plan, and if all the part of the plan is also including good as well, then it goes hand in hand. Almost like, it's a weird analogy I was about to make. I was about to say like peanut butter and jelly. Like I said, it's two sides to the same coin, which that's so fascinating. But you have Manuel, saying, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna watch the mirror, but Paco secretly put up a whole bunch of cameras, which Elena at first was kind of against, and even I'm like, why would you want to be against that? But I guess for her, it's like, you wouldn't want someone all up in your privacy, what you're doing, recording you secretly. Because for her, Elena, it's like, I don't need proof of all the crazy shit that's going on. Like, it's as real to me as you and me talking right now. So I don't but for Paco, it's like, no, like, I mean, they need proof, because for Paco, it's like, he's neck deep in all of this. Yeah, he might not have known about the calf. He might not have known about the Ouija board, but the fact of the matter is he's at the heart of everything. So for him, it's, kind of taking his wife's advice and getting, he needs evidence if he wants to kind of get, obviously his wife had suggested like kicking him out of town and everything. And this was a means of kind of going, well, for Paco, he needed the verification. He needed to see what was going to go on. Like, I guess, because it came down to it again of being like, okay, so what does Manuel know? But even he was unaware about this mirror situation. So that's why he was studying it. Because even at points you see him looking behind, because he sees a rat in the mirror. He's like, okay, is that real? But because obviously trying to figure out, okay, what's different, But at one point, he ends up going into sleep. Luckily, Paco was recording it, and so he shows him. It's like, look, your reflection stood up and was looking at you. And then there's also the door thing, which was like creepy in the sense that like the door is closed in their side, but then when they look in the mirror, it's open, and he grabs the door and he's opening and closing it on their side, but in the mirror, it looks like he's doing nothing because the door is actually still open. I'm like, oh, dude, that's so creepy and trippy. What even gets trippier is at the hospital, the wife is talking to Elena, and it's like, the book, you can actually touch it. Even though we can't see it, we can touch it, even move it. And then she start, like, it didn't go down that route, but part of me was like, oh, that's a little existential, because she started being like, what if our world is fake? Because it's like, that book exists because you can feel it, you can actually touch it, you can move it, you just can't see it. But it's like, what if our side is actually the false side or something? And I was like, oh, that's a little existential in a little bit of a case. But, that could have just been me reading too much into it. But that ends up playing a pivotal role later on. But it does, in fact, turn out that this is the Canaanites behind all of this. Them wanting the coin and everything. Because it turns out the mirror shows you your greatest fear. We never actually got to find out what Tomas's was. We only get to see, I think Elena and Paco never stared at it long enough. To be fair, he was in front of it all night, so I think it had enough time to... I mean, to be fair, he was the main target anyway, so I guess it was all about getting to him in the first place. But he's basically being confronted with his greatest fear, because it turns out, like, that open door, Yakama was there. At least his body was. And obviously, Elena talks about it. It's like, you keep trying to run away from this. You try to run from it before, and it found its way to you. You can try and destroy this mirror, but because it's like, that's your solution, rather than, and he even said that line of like, the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's fear. And we shouldn't fear, but obviously but for him, it's like, I don't need a mirror to make me feel guilty about my past. He's like, I live with it every day, like the guilt over what happened to Yakama. So like, he already feels it. I don't need even more of it. So he's talking to his reflection, which is like, you didn't listen to them before. They want the coin. So when it's all said and done, it's like, oh, you want to talk to Yakama? Like, I'll bring him here. Because what you really want deep down is his forgiveness, right? And it's like, oh, will you forgive me? He gets snatched. His reflection comes out. And I'm like, oh, shit. The mirror had broken when he got pulled through, but then it like repairs itself. And then reflected, Manuel explains everything. That basically the Cainites are trying to basically get, whereas there are holy objects, they are basically the inverse of everything kind of like that Christianity kind of represents. They're kind of like the inverse of it. They basically, whereas Christianity holds on to these holy things, they want objects that hurt Christ, you know? So basically the spikes that went in his arm, in his hands and his feet, the thorn crown, the spear that stabbed him, as well as the 30 coins, because that is the greatest, you know, most powerful evil in itself, betrayal. I was like, that's so fascinating. And I thought it was so fascinating that, like, the mirrored Manuel was so willing to tell, but I guess it's like he knew that if he could get them to trust him, they'd be more likely to hand over the coin. But even Elena thought it was weird. It's like she says it later, like, you were so fearful before, but now you seem so certain and so sure, you know? So they had their inclinations that it was a mirror Manuel, but it's not until she looked at his watch and it was going like it was backwards that she realized, like, oh, that's not the real him. That was crazy. And then also, like, I didn't talk about it, but obviously we saw it earlier in the episode, the dogs at her clinic going wild. One in particular, because the coin. Because apparently, I mean, that's a thing, I think, superstition-wise, that animals can sense kind of evil, and obviously there's evil coming from that coin. But they can kind of sense evil. They know something's off. So the dog was basically losing its mind. And later on, like all the animals, to the point that that dog like hurt itself getting out the damn cage. Then it ends up attacking Paco, which I immediately was like, damn, Paco's getting messed up every damn episode, right? He gets hurt every damn episode. It's kind of funny because I think, Elena kind of walks away with some scrapes too, but it's like I feel like Paco's sadly gotten it the worst. I'm like, man. Kind of reminds, I was about to say it kind of reminds me of Dave Boy from Pennyworth, because it seemed like every time he walks away from every situation hurting no one else. I won't get into that because it's spoilers about stuff. But regardless. So it's like, if this is the fake Manuel, where's the real one? And it's like, well, got to go through the mirror, right? At the same time, you had Manuel, the mirror version, like, you know, the sheriff or officer had showed up and it's like, no, you don't need to go to the clinic. Go back to the station like nothing's wrong, then meet me at the church in 30 minutes. And it was like, wait, you can like control people? I mean, I guess it makes sense because you're kind of like, I guess you kind of represent what the mirror represents, and it's like bouncing stuff back to you. I thought your whole thing was just fear, but I guess it's like, maybe it's a power that was bestowed upon him by like the Cainites, that they're able to like give him all this power. Whatever the case may be, I guess it's like because of what he did. That is it. I guess it plays into it, you know, more specifically, like he is the mirror. It is a physical manifestation of the mirror in the sense that it draws upon people's fear, and that's what he does. It's like all these fears you have, it's like all this doubt, and he's like spreading it like by being like, oh yeah, the evil that's in the world, you don't have to go to hell and look to hell to find it. You'll find it here on earth. This and that, turning the entire town against Paco and Elena, even suggesting like they're doing their thing. Obviously, his wife, Paco's wife, is there, and it's kind of, you know, like I said, it's sparking that their greatest fears being bounced back at them. They go to Elena's clinic, and they're trashing it. And then later on, they're walking out, all of them, and especially Paco's wife being like, almost got this look like, wait, what we doing? I'm like, how is the entire town going to explain that to themselves to be like, we just went in there and destroyed her place for no damn reason? Like, you know, they probably don't remember the ins and outs of it, but it's like they were so consumed by that fear and that, you know, that impulse to do that it's like, I'm curious to see whether they explain that or not, like next episode or not, because I'm like, how do you explain all that? But Elena and Paco were able to get into the mirror because Elena picked up the book, threw it at the mirror, and shattered it. They go through it. Obviously, they find their way into the Canaanites like world, and obviously it's like, well, not their world, but at least like, I guess like one of their hubs, because now there's mirrors like showing different places. At one point, you see like the pyramids of Egypt, what looked like could have been like New York, which I didn't talk about it because we had that New York scene at the beginning. I'm assuming Home Dude was a dead dude because he had the same thing around his neck like the dude from the first episode. Granted, he was talking and the other dude wasn't, so I don't know. I assumed it was kind of like a zombie situation of like, oh, you're being, but maybe this guy isn't a zombie. Maybe he wasn't dead and brought back to life. Maybe it's just purely like a, hey, I control you, but maybe it's like the price for using it is, death, Which is so interesting because obviously that's an aspect of this episode too, was like Manuel talking about the heavy price for kind of like the good in the world is that there is the evil to it. Like I said, the yin and yang of it, kind of like the balance of things. The heavy price for there to being good is the heavy price of evil to a certain extent. It's all fascinating breaking it all down, but circling back to what I was talking about before, there's all those mirrors that I guess lets them kind of peer into other locations around the world. I guess I don't know if those mirrors could necessarily be used the same way as like as a means of teleportation, like you can go through the mirrors, but it's like you can at least, I guess this gives them a worldwide view where they can get like a peek into every world. It's kind of what those mirrors represent. Whatever the case may be, obviously we see that a lot of the members have coins. They don't have all the coins, but from what we can see, it seems like each one of them had a coin. Well, some of them, because there was, I think, one or two they showed that didn't. So showing that they have a good chunk of the coins, and obviously they're getting more and more every day. It's like, so, Manuel, where's yours? Luckily, Elena and Paco were able to save him. When Manuel went through the mirror on that side, it broke, so they couldn't follow. So they managed to escape. But when they escaped, the mirror ended up vanishing, and the fake mirror Manuel ends up disappearing. Paco's calling up his wife after everything, be like, yeah, there was an accident with, the father, so he's at the hospital, that's why I couldn't contact you. It's like, oh, okay. And she's like, and Paco, he's like, what? She's like, never mind, I'll be happy to see you again. So it's like, is she going to explain what happened there? Maybe, maybe not. You also have Antonio, it's so interesting because it seems like he's helping them out, but obviously the Canaanites are talking to him, but I guess it's like he's trying to nudge them in the right direction so that the Canaanites can, because he's even explaining to Paco, it's like, you made a move now, but now the ball's in your corner. You don't want to play the game anymore. Well, not play the game anymore, you're going to have to puncture the ball, which I guess you can make the argument that's what Elena did. She punctured the ball by throwing away the coin. So it's like, you want it so badly, you're going to have to find it. We no longer have it, so maybe you'll leave us the hell alone. But I'm wondering, is it going to be one of those situations where the coin finds maybe it's latched onto Elena at this point, or at least latched onto one of those three, that it's just magically going to pop up where she is? I don't know. It's some interesting developments. I'm curious to see, obviously, like I said, each episode is going to have something new for them. They're going to deal with what that next thing is going to be, but also where all this takes us after, what Manuel went through. And once again, what about Elena's clinic? Is the entire town going to be like, yeah, oh yeah, what happened? Are they just knowing, do they just remember enough to be like, wait, we got here, how did we get here, what's going on, why were we here in the first place? But the way Paco's wife was maybe it's because she was like, maybe the town is going to chalk it up to, we had some great hallucination or delusion. I wonder, because it seemed like it was kind of breaking even before, mirror version of Manuel disappeared, so maybe it fully broke when he disappeared, but after they did what they needed to do, maybe at that point the spell had already kind of been broken over them. Whatever the case may be, I'm curious. Like I said, I'm curious to know how they're going to answer that, how they all reacted in that regard. But like I said, Elena made a big move this episode, throwing away the coin. We're going to see what ends up happening because of that. Obviously, this focuses on the 30 coins, but they have brought up the other key items. I guess because mirror version of Manuel has said that the 30 coins are going to be together or more powerful than like the Ark of the Covenant. So I guess all the other things, the spikes, the thorn crown, even the spear, pale in comparison because those 30 coins all represent betrayal. Which is once again just interesting considering like, oh, they believe that the betrayal was done because it was all part of God's plan. That it's crazy that this like ultimate version of evil is them trying to complete what they believe to be God's plan, because the ultimate evil has to be a part of the plan because evil is part of the plan in general. It's going to be interesting, like I said, in general. I keep saying it over and over again, to see where all the six is going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good